Hello and welcome back to the Cities Climate Action Summit. Great to have so many of you with us for this next session. It's been a really great day so far with keynotes and panels on urban heat, policy development and green mobility. And if you have missed any of it, it is, well, fully worth your time going to catch up, which you can do anytime with those sessions now available on demand. Now, though, it's time to kick off the next portion of our agenda, beginning with a session I've been looking forward to for some time, and on a topic very much grounded in the here and now when it comes to what is needed next in the urban climate action agenda, and that is green finance. And this is obviously one of the main themes for our summit today and tomorrow. You'll see it threaded throughout, and specifically here we're looking at the power of creative thinking to unlock green finance for cities. And to guide us through, it's my pleasure to welcome Prashant Kapoor, Chief Industry Specialist, Green Buildings and Cities at the IFC Climate Business Group for Climate Change, which is part of the World Bank Group. Prashant, welcome along. I'm going to hand over to you here to introduce yourself and get this session underway properly. Welcome along.
Hi, everyone. My name is Prashant Kapoor. I'm the Chief Industry Specialist for Green Buildings at the IFC, which is part of the World Bank Group. And I should be talking about power of creative thinking to unlock green financing for cities. The reason I bring this up is I don't believe that cities are doing enough in mobilizing finance. And when they do mobilize some of the finance, they aren't thinking through always getting the right kind of priorities. And I would be talking to you about why cities need quantitative insights and how they can use tools through what I'll be sharing. They can use tools to mobilize investments, in greening these cities. Essentially, without, kind of tackling climate change in cities, we will not be getting anywhere, right? Because cities are, contribute to 70% of the greenhouse gas emissions. But I think when we go to cities, talk to a mayor in an emerging market, trying to convince them that they should do the right thing by kind of reducing carbon emissions, they might agree, but I think in order to really get the political backing, you really have to kind of tackle their critical issues, such as waste management, water shortage, congestion, electricity shortages, and kind of issues like that. And the good news we find is that by going after those actionable green cities ideas, can also tackle climate change goals. So it's not kind of, one or the other, essentially, right? So I think that's our approach. I think we feel, that by going after what they really care about, we might have better success in convincing the people, the leadership, as well as investors to make the right space, right kind of momentum in the space. Also kind of not making this about kind of, that they're doing something wrong and that they should correct this, but really making this quite sexy, showing them the benefits of green cities is really important. Because, cities are the places where jobs are happening, young people are looking to kind of contribute, and showing that it can really bring them visibility, attract finance, and more fundamentally, green cities means better cities, right? They have better planning. And better management, essentially. Also, don't forget that having some of these aspects you can actually reduce your operating cost, you can actually get revenue mechanisms, you can also reduce risk so that you don't have to keep rebuilding things after damages and things like that, right? So there's some economic benefit in getting green as well. Climate smart growth presents an enormous investment opportunity in cities. We estimate that cities in emerging markets have a $7.6 trillion investment need between now and 2030. And you can see a large chunk of that is in the buildings and energy, transport, even water, and some in waste as well. And now you can look at this as an opportunity. You can look at this as a need, But more strangely, even the investments that do go in don't necessarily go in the right places. For example, I'm going to take this bus in an undisclosed city in Europe. You can see that they've used green roofs on top, and frankly, it sounded like a good idea, but nobody did the numbers, perhaps. In terms of looking at is this really the right thing to focus on? Would it really make any difference? And how much will it cost? And does it actually increase or decrease the efficiency of transport, right? So how does the city really make, the right choices? And, we feel that, we need quantitative insights to really make a difference here. And this is where, we've been collecting over the last half a decade. We've been collecting information from good practices around the various cities around the world, about 100 of them, and really picking up good things that these cities have done and looking at what enabled that to happen, what difference they've made, how much it has cost, so that other cities can also use that. So we really kind of looked at not just the investment aspects, but also the kind of policy aspects that the city can adopt. And we put them all into a tool called Apex. And essentially, the Apex tool is an investment planning tool for cities. It allows us to have a conversation with cities so that we can identify, and I'll show you a quick demo later. But I think the idea is to have most of the contextual data that the cities can use to choose the right green measures, to understand what difference it makes when, in terms of impact, and then look at how much these things cost. Then we can use this platform to create an investment plan, and I'll show you how that works. And then the city can also use the same platform to compare how they're performing against other cities or how they're performing against their past. Let me quickly demo this for you. And basically, our focus through this tool is looking at energy, built environment, transport, waste and water. And basically you can choose a city, and it has inbuilt data that we've collected from across the world. In this case, we're choosing Chennai. We can go into buildings, for example, buildings and energy, and it tells you what the current energy consumption of buildings in the city is. And then it also shows you future projections. You can adjust this, business as usual projections. You can see the new growth in emerging markets can be almost double. So getting the city to realize that if they feel they have problems today, they're going to have almost twice the amount of problems in the future. So then they can actually sort of start thinking about should they be tackling issues that are in the pipeline rather than just trying to tackle the issues they currently have on hand. This is the improved case, and as they make changes, and on the left-hand side, they have a whole list of measures that we built in. They have algorithms and calculations behind it. This is a bit simplistic, but you can see as you check these things, you can see what effect it has on the overall performance. Yeah, so the tool is only as good as what we use it for, and essentially we use this tool to work with various cities to come up with the Green City Action Plan, and also to come up with a diagnostic tool. So sometimes cities already have an action plan. In that case, we work along with the city, taking the action plan, getting them to understand what those various actions will deliver, understand how much these things would cost, and then finally look at financing mechanisms that they can use to finance this, for the next 10 years or so. These are the cities we work with so far. I'll walk you through some of the examples. You can see it's only emerging markets we work in. And essentially, right now we're kind of working city by city, but I think the idea is to have a more programmatic approach as we go further. Okay, a little snapshot of what comes out of these Green City Action Plans. We're using the tool. In the case of Upulreni, which is a South African city next to Joburg, we helped the city narrow down the 200 ideas that they had currently in their plans to down to 20, which were really meaningful, that would have the kind of reduction they want to see. Overall, they're looking at about 27% greenhouse gas emissions. But in this case, you can see they were looking at how do you optimize energy? How do you lower the private transportation that is happening? How they can make better use of the waste that, rather than put it into landfill, looking at water security, which is a big issue in South Africa as well. So you can see we've been using the tool. We've been able to help city pick the kind of investment opportunities, planning opportunities, but also policy drivers that they can use to push this. It all gets put into a report that the city can use to explain to their citizens, but also to investors as we go. Just a little bit deeper. So what, these are the kind of investment pipelines we help the city create. And basically it gives them a sense of size. In this case, they need about 650 million US dollars in the next 10 years to kind of account for in their budgeting. And you can see for each of these things, we help them prioritize what effect it has in terms of cost to benefit. Moving beyond this through our investment diagnostics, this is for another city in Manila called Quezon City. We were able to kind of take their action plan. You can see they have a long list of ideas, kind of bundle them up into packages that can then be used. Then we can apply different financing mechanisms. We help the city figure out, what is the best thing where they can use their national transfers or where they can use their municipal debt, where the PPP, private-public partnership, is best suited, and then identify where the private sector has to step in and the amount of financing they would need. I mean, this is the big missing piece in the conversation. A lot of the talk around, climate financing for cities has been around municipal infrastructure, but really, just fixing municipal infrastructure is not going to be enough, right? We need to get the existing buildings and the private transport also kind of moving in the space. And I believe cities have a big role, not just to kind of mobilize their infrastructure, but also to mobilize kind of this, mobilize the private sector to go green. I'll show you through examples as we go further. So firstly, looking at, looking at how the city can access private sector, of course, they can get municipal debt, they can get investors from outside, but really looking at the kind of innovative aspects of this. And when it comes to private sector financing for municipal needs, the most obvious thing is PPP. But even within that, there are some interesting innovations that are needed. And I'll walk you through a couple. The first one is on transport. And you can see here, we're looking at unbundled asset model. But basically, what tends to happen is that in a city, the city, the public transport is run by either the private sector or the public sector transport companies, and neither of them are perfectly suited to kind of, to be able to kind of buy a new set of buses to make investments. So what we have found as a clever mechanism, this is being used in Chile and in Colombia and in some of the cities like that, where, the asset is kept separately, and we can look at how we can have separate investments in the buses as an asset, and then using that vehicle to kind of lend or kind of have an agreement with the private sector, meaning the operators, who can then not have the liabilities of owning the buses, and then they can focus on operating the buses clearly. And that way, the burden is not on the operators to kind of buy these buses, and neither is the burden on the municipality to run the buses. So you get this perfect balance by using this approach. Another example, this is more for buildings, is using energy efficiency as a service or performance contracts to upgrade buildings. I think this is a big mixed opportunity. A lot of times I see cities using their own funds to upgrade, but I think this is a space that private sector can easily come in, as long as there is clear ability in terms of legal aspects for capex to be invested by the private sector. And then all you need is a sort of an agreement where, based on the savings achieved, the municipality can give money on a regular basis, on an operating basis, to the ESCO company or energy efficiency as a service company, or it could be a fee agreement, right? And you can see an example here in Houston. They managed to have many buildings that they own upgraded through this mechanism. And I think we're seeing more and more interest in this space, but I think this is got to be the way we need to kind of use existing assets and let the people who can manage and have a long-term contract to allow them to get the profits and then benefit from that, essentially. Now, moving on to the city itself, I think this is a big missed opportunity, and I think there's a lot of scope here. Most cities have many banks, local banks, private and public, who are not necessarily engaged in changing in the transformation of the city. And I think through some clever thinking, we can actually make this difference happen. Let me give you an example. We were working on Medellin in Colombia. And here, this is the list of ideas that they wanted financing, and we bundled them into private and public infrastructure, municipal buildings. These are the public ones, and then a whole bunch of private and semi-public aspects here. And for each of these things, there is scope for them to kind of involve the local financial intermediaries, which is basically local banks. They can borrow money either from international MDBs like us or from local intermediaries for having loans or bonds to have the kind of public and municipal buildings upgraded, but also the private sector side. I think there's a scope, and I'll go into that a little later as to how that can be tapped. Okay. One other angle is at a subnational level, whether it's at a state level or a country level, having a whole bunch of cities with clear investment pipelines and finding a way where we can work with multiple financing intermediaries who can then lend to this pipeline, essentially creating a market of many cities that have clarity on what they want funded and finding ways to channel the funding with informed cities, essentially. Okay, so another aspect here is to have cities facilitate finance for private sector. As I mentioned earlier, this is a space that the cities traditionally don't see their role. They see the role as sort of getting municipal infrastructure finance and perhaps a little bit of PPP, but really the big gap here is really mobilizing the private sector itself for its own need. And I think you might think this is not in their scope really, but I think I'll show you through a couple of examples how cities can play a role in making that change happen. Firstly, I want to start with, if you just think of them as banks, banks provide, mortgages, they provide loans for vehicles, they provide solar finance and things like that. And I think if the cities can find a way to kind of create the environment so that projects can be labeled, there's clarity on what are the green assets, by creating advocacy and creating a kind of an environment where the FIs can step in, and maybe even having a charter, a local, kind of a contract with the city and the local banks to kind of promote this and understanding what do they need to push this to happen, that could really work. And I'll give you an example. This may seem kind of a pie in the sky, but I've really seen this in the private sector building space, which is green construction and green mortgages, to be really transformational. We've been working in Colombia as IFC with our Green Buildings program, and you can look at the website greenbuildings.com, and we worked with the government there to come up with incentives, and we funded a bank through a green bond facility to provide green mortgages for end customers and developer finance for the kind of developers in the market. It was transformational. Once the banks started to see the benefit, both in terms of a slightly better interest rate on these products, but also the end customers started to see the value of having green homes and the banks enabling this. We saw a huge jump in sort of 4 years. A huge percentage. You can see 20% by 2022. That has been achieved here. But today we're running at 37% of Colombia having green certified new construction, essentially. So you can see how transformational banks can be. We started with one bank and now there are 5 banks. Pretty much all big banks are lending to the space. The similar story repeats itself in places like South Africa and others. And this, I think, is the opportunity where we can bring in, electric vehicle financing, solar financing through the same mechanism, and that could be hugely transformational and not looking purely from municipal space as a way to transform cities. Okay, a few more couple of examples to kind of, to tackle the more difficult aspects of retrofitting buildings. And I think US has through its PACE program has shown how much can be done through property tax based mechanisms. Essentially, banks can lend to building owners, and the building owners can repay the borrowed amount through an increase in property tax. And the city then collects this on a regular basis, returns it back to the bank. This allows 2 things to happen. One is that it allows a long-term finance, which typically building owners don't get. And secondly, it allows the the building owner to be able to sell the projects and not be linked to the, it's not sitting on their own personal kind of loan, right? So that allows others to come in and, to pay the remaining amount in case they sell them out. So this has been something we are piloting in other cities across emerging markets. And we feel, this mechanism could have a big impact in tackling the more hard to, abate areas in the city space, which is existing buildings, especially commercial buildings. Another example here is on-bill financing. This is very similar to the PLF, property linked finance, but in this case, you use the electricity meter where you have a favorable utility company that can collect the money. So I won't go into the details, but here the commercial banks again can have a big role. You can see through this example in Tunisia, where they were able to finance both the solar hot water as well as solar panels upgrade through this mechanism. And you can see huge impact, right? 500,000 homes. There is another example in Mexico where 1 million homes were retrofitted, and the air conditioning systems and the refrigerators, the fridges were upgraded as well. Okay, last example. I will basically talk about how performance-linked instruments can help the cities get access to financing. Traditionally, project finance is the main way cities borrow, especially with green bonds and loans. Cities need to produce a list of project they want funding, and then a financing agency funds that, right? But I think what performance-linked instruments such as sustainable-linked bonds have shown is that by detaching that, the city is able to get financing and using not projects but performance as the main kind of commitment or target, essentially. You can see in this example in Helsingborg. We've got a city committing to net zero carbon target of 2035, and they use that commitment and the trajectory as the way to have an interest rate step down as they met the commitment. I'll show you a couple more examples in this space. I was just talking to you about Helsingborg. You can see some of the aspects here. There's also, ones where you have, it doesn't have to be the whole city. In this case, they were just using the municipal, a district within the city. Zagreb, this is a funding that IFC was involved in. It was sustainable-linked bond in Croatia. And essentially here, the utility company was the main kind of borrower for the municipal services that they were committing against. And so on. I won't go through all the examples here, but I think the advantage here is that you can borrow, money for general purpose instruments potentially, and then you can make commitments that allows you to do policy changes, allows you to do planning changes, and not just be limited by infrastructure investments. Right, and this is also a place where Apex can play a role. We can use the actions that have been committed by the city as targets, and we can have a forward-looking target and performance-based incentives that can actually then be tracked. And there could be some incentive, either step up or step down in interest rate that can allow the city to kind of track and get the incentives for meeting these commitments. And potentially the impact of doing this may be much higher than any investments that, project-based investments that one might have made in the city. Lastly, I feel one has to look at a long-term relationship with cities as this example shows in Ismail. We've been working with the city for more than a decade, as you can see. It started off with a series of loans in the beginning, and now we moved to more advisory and some investment supports over the years. But I think, the relationship should not be a kind of a transactional thing. It should be more about having a city understand what their needs are, having clarity on quantitatively what do they need to do and where they're headed and what difference it makes, and then build relationship with financing partners like ourselves to kind of have that plan implemented. I'll stop with this slide. I think if there are any cities that are interested in participating and working with us, happy to work with you. Especially if you have senior leadership and political kind of support behind it. We believe this can be hugely transformational. And the power of creative thinking when it comes to green financing can make a huge difference in achieving your goals. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Prashant. I mean, amazing. And one of the most important parts of the summit that we're running here is pulling out actionable insights. And that was absolutely packed with them, which is fantastic. What you said about identifying the right priorities and the right actions is so pertinent. Asking the right questions about approach, method, and probably most importantly, outcomes is so key at this stage of the climate crisis. And obviously, the work being done here through the Apex initiative is really eye-opening for us. And these investment pipelines, along with matching that pipeline with available financing mechanisms, makes this tangible. And like you said as well, identifying where private finance is needed more specifically can help to mobilize the private sector and bring them on that journey. It breaks it down in a way that is, I suppose, slightly more bite-sized, more accessible, more understandable. And what you said as well about the potential for more local finance to be involved here as an intermediary as well, it provides real food for thought. There is a massive opportunity there. It's not something that we hear about all that often. Seeing some of the examples that you've mentioned around green buildings, I think it just demonstrates the possibilities and, like you say, the potential for expanding this into other areas. And all of the case studies demonstrate the ability to scale some of these approaches, and that's so important to hear about, because that's what we need at this stage of where we are with climate, is action at scale. So thank you so much. Really, really appreciate your time here. If there were one key message you would leave for cities, I'd be interested to know what that would be.
Thanks, Luke. Yeah, I think, mostly, kind of looking at it from an emerging markets lens, cities in developing countries, I think there is a little bit of hesitation thinking this is sort of a huge expenditure plan for something that, they have so many other priorities, that they're dealing with, right? Housing, poverty, just basic services. But I think if they approach it from a different perspective, rather than seeing this as kind of an expenditure, but look at it as a revenue generating model. If you can find the right balance where, you can take congestion charging in London, for example, looking at that, not doing it for the revenue, but finding a way where you can connect the revenue and not looking at this for expenditure, where you have some revenue, have private sector take a lot of that on. And then that will allow you to have a much greater, a much more kind of sophisticated financing opportunity, rather than just purely looking at government transfers or just purely looking at municipal debt. I think that's really what I would say. Kind of look at this creatively and involve the private sector, not just for your own funding. I think the PPP story is well known and I think understood. But I think the bit that is not clear is, how can I get developers? How can I get ESCO companies? How can I get local banks to participate? Even how can I get electric vehicle, companies to provide leasing and vendor finance? I mean, I've not covered some of those aspects, but I think that's the secret to this. I feel, time is running up. I mean, for, generally, but I think for climate change, really. But I think, I think if you can get this right, they can actually be a fairly profitable city by tackling these aspects as well. I think that's really what I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you say about, the possibilities here, and kind of new considerations and new possibilities is really important. And I think more than important, I think it's inspiring as well, because that's why we're here hosting this summit in the first place, is to try and inspire others into more urgent action. And I think that lands really, really well. That is just about all the time that we've got on this session, but what a great session. If anybody watching has joined us late, you will be able to catch up on demand with this session as soon as it's finished. We'll be jumping straight into our next session, another climate financing session straight after this. So hopefully we'll see you on that one as well. But thanks again, Prashant. Really appreciate your time and insight here. And I'm sure for those of you watching, we'll see you shortly. Thank you very much.